The California sun was setting as Calvin's Snoop Dogg brought us, wrapped up another productive day at the recording studio. The sky painted itself in shades of orange and purple, a beautiful backdrop to an otherwise ordinary Tuesday evening in Los Angeles. Snoop gathered his things, said goodbye to his production team, and headed to his car in the parking lot. "See you tomorrow, same time?" called out his longtime friend and producer as Snoop walked toward the exit. "You know it," Snoop replied with his signature laid-back smile. "Got some new ideas I want to try out." The iconic rapper slid into his sleek black SUV, the leather seats cool against his back. He connected his phone to the car's sound system and put on one of his unreleased tracks, nodding along to the beat as he pulled out onto the street. The music filled the car, and Snoop tapped his fingers against the steering wheel, making mental notes about small tweaks he wanted to make to the song tomorrow. Traffic was light as he cruised through the city streets. The day had been good, productive and creative. After decades in the music business, Snoop still found joy in crafting new sounds and connecting with fans. He had plans to work on his community program tomorrow afternoon, a youth initiative he had started to keep kids off the streets and in the studio, channeling their energy into music instead of trouble. As he drove, his thoughts drifted to the upcoming weekend barbecue he was hosting for friends and family. These moments of normalcy were precious to him, despite his fame. Just a man enjoying the simple pleasures of good food, good music, and good company. The neighborhoods changed as he drove, moving from commercial areas to more residential streets. Snoop turned down the volume of his music a bit, always respectful of the communities he passed through. He was about 15 minutes from home when he noticed the flashing lights in his rearview mirror. Blue and red lights pulsed behind him, cutting through the growing darkness. Snoop checked his speedometer. He hadn't been speeding. He ran through a mental checklist: taillights working, registration up to date, nothing illegal in the car. Confused but not particularly worried, he signaled and pulled over to the side of the road, making sure to stop in a well-lit area near a convenience store. He turned off his music and rolled down his window. From his driver's education and years of experience, he knew the drill. Keep your hands visible on the steering wheel, be polite, and stay calm. No sudden movements. These were lessons his mother had taught him growing up, lessons that became even more important when you were a black man in America. Regardless of your fame or success, Snoop watched in the side mirror as an officer stepped out of the patrol car. The cop was white, probably in his mid-30s, with a rigid posture that seemed unnecessarily tense for a routine traffic stop. As the officer approached, Snoop noticed his hand was already resting on his holster. This small detail sent a ripple of unease through him. "Evening, officer," Snoop said calmly as the policeman reached his window. "What seems to be the problem?" The officer's face remained stone-like, his eyes hidden behind reflective sunglasses despite the fading daylight. His nameplate read Reynolds. "License and registration," Officer Reynolds demanded, not bothering to answer the question. His tone was sharp, almost hostile. "Of course," Snoop replied, keeping his voice even. "My registration is in the glove compartment. I'm going to reach for it now if that's okay." Without waiting for permission, Snoop slowly moved his right hand from the steering wheel toward the glove compartment. It happened in an instant. The sound of a gun being unholstered, the flash of metal in the evening light. "Hands where I can see them," Reynolds shouted, his gun now pointed directly at Snoop's head. "Don't move." The sudden escalation froze Snoop in place. His heart hammered in his chest, but years of navigating tense situations helped him maintain an outward calm. He slowly returned his hand to the steering wheel, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "I apologize, officer," he said, his voice remarkably steady despite staring down the barrel of a gun. "I was just reaching for my registration like you asked. You people always think you can do whatever you want," Reynolds spat out, his gun still aimed at Snoop. Always reaching for things when an officer is standing right there. The phrase, "you people," hung in the air, heavy with implied meaning. Snoop felt a familiar weight settle in his stomach, the weight of being judged not by his actions but by the color of his skin. By now, a small crowd had begun to gather near the convenience store. Some people had recognized Snoop and several had their phones out recording the incident. The situation was escalating in ways that could turn dangerous quickly. "Officer, I mean no disrespect," Snoop said calmly. "I'm happy to cooperate. Just tell me what you need me to do." Reynolds seemed momentarily taken aback by Snoop's composure. Perhaps he had expected, or even wanted, a different reaction, something that would justify the gun still pointed at the rapper's head. "Step out of the vehicle," Reynolds ordered, taking a step back but keeping his weapon trained on Snoop. Slowly, Snoop complied, moving with deliberate care. As he emerged from the SUV, the growing crowd gasped. Someone called out, "That's Snoop Dogg. What are you doing to him?" Reynolds glanced nervously at the onlookers, seeming to realize for the first time that this traffic stop had an audience, and that his target was not just any black man but a beloved cultural icon. Still, he didn't holster his weapon. "Turn around and place your hands on the vehicle," Reynolds commanded, his voice slightly less certain now. Again, Snoop complied without complaint, turning to face his car and placing his palms flat against the cool metal of the hood. The position was humiliating, especially with dozens of eyes watching, but he understood the dangerous dance of power and compliance that was playing out. One wrong move, one misinterpreted gesture could have devastating consequences. "May I ask why I was pulled over?" Snoop questioned, his tone respectful but firm. Reynolds approached and roughly patted him down. "Your tint is too dark. Looks like you've got something to hide." Snoop knew his windows were within legal limits. He'd specifically checked when purchasing the vehicle. This wasn't about window tint. This was about something else entirely. "My windows are factory standard, officer," Snoop replied calmly. "I made sure they were legal when I bought the car." "You calling me a liar?" Reynolds stepped closer, his breath hot on Snoop's neck. "Think because you're some big-shot rapper the laws don't apply to you?" The situation was deteriorating. From the corner of his eye, Snoop could see more people gathering. Someone was live streaming. Others were shouting at the officer. The tension in the air was thick enough to touch. "Not at all, sir," Snoop responded, keeping his voice low and steady. "I respect the law and your position. I'm just trying to understand the situation." A second patrol car pulled up, lights flashing but no siren. An older officer stepped out, Sergeant Wilson according to his uniform, and took in the scene with obvious concern. He approached Reynolds, speaking in hushed tones that Snoop couldn't quite make out. "Do you know who this is?" Sergeant Wilson asked, loud enough for Snoop to hear this time. Reynolds shrugged. "Don't care who he is. Rules apply to everyone." The sergeant turned to Snoop, recognition dawning on his face. "Mr. Broaddus? Is there a problem here?" Before Snoop could answer, Reynolds cut in. "I pulled him over for illegal tint. Then he made a suspicious movement toward his glove box." Snoop remained silent, watching the dynamic between the two officers. The sergeant looked skeptical. "Reynolds, your body cam on?" Wilson asked. "Of course," Reynolds replied, though something in his tone suggested he wished it wasn't. The crowd had grown larger, more vocal. The situation balanced on a knife's edge. One wrong move from anyone involved could send things spiraling out of control. Snoop remained still, hands on the hood of his car, aware that his response in the next few moments would matter tremendously, not just for himself, but potentially for countless others who found themselves in similar situations without cameras or crowds to serve as witnesses. In that moment, Snoop made a decision. He wouldn't respond with anger or indignation, though both emotions simmered beneath his calm exterior. Instead, he would take a different approach, one that might surprise everyone involved, especially Officer Reynolds. The California night had grown fully dark now, the scene illuminated only by streetlights, store signs, and the flashing red and blue of police cruisers. As Snoop stood there, he knew this was more than just a traffic stop gone wrong. It was a moment that could define not just his night, but something much larger than himself. Time seemed to stand still as Snoop remained with his hands on the hood of his SUV. The crowd of onlookers had grown to about 30 people now, their phones capturing every moment of the tense standoff. The convenience store owner had stepped outside, concern etched on his face as he watched the scene unfold under the harsh glow of streetlights. Sergeant Wilson stepped closer to Reynolds, lowering his voice but still audible in the night air. "I think you need to take a step back. The situation is getting out of hand." "I'm just doing my job," Reynolds insisted, his gun still drawn though now pointed slightly downward. He could be armed. These rapper types usually are. Snoop heard the comment and felt a familiar ache in his chest. After all these years, all his success, all his community work, he was still being reduced to a stereotype. But rather than letting anger take over, he took a deep breath and centered himself. "Officer Reynolds," Snoop said calmly, still facing his car. "I understand you're doing your job. I respect that. But I think there's been a misunderstanding here," Reynolds scoffed. "There's no misunderstanding. You made a sudden movement during a traffic stop." "I was reaching for my registration like you asked me to," Snoop replied, his tone remaining respectful despite the circumstances. Sergeant Wilson gave Reynolds a hard look. "Holster your weapon now." Reynolds hesitated, then reluctantly put his gun away, the metallic click seeming to release some of the tension in the air. The crowd murmured their approval, though many still filmed the interaction. "Mr. Broaddus, you can turn around now," Wilson said. "Slowly, please." Snoop carefully turned to face the officers. The night had grown cooler, and a light breeze rustled through nearby trees. In the distance, more sirens could be heard approaching. News traveled fast, especially when it involved someone of Snoop's stature. "Thank you, Sergeant," Snoop said with a nod. "May I retrieve my ID and registration now?" Wilson nodded. "I'll get it." "Which side of the glove compartment?" "Right side," Snoop answered. "And my wallet is in my back pocket." As Wilson retrieved the documents, Reynolds stood with his arms crossed, jaw tight with unspoken anger. His body language screamed discomfort and defensiveness. "Everything seems to be in order," Wilson said after checking Snoop's paperwork. "Your window tint is within legal limits, Mr. Broaddus." Reynolds shifted his weight, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "I had reasonable suspicion." "Based on what?" Wilson challenged. Before Reynolds could answer, another police car pulled up. A man in plain clothes stepped out, Lieutenant Davis, as Snoop would later learn. The lieutenant took in the scene quickly, noting the crowd, the cameras, and the famous figure at the center of it all. "What's going on here?" he asked, approaching the group. Wilson gave him a quick rundown of the situation while Snoop stood patiently, aware that every move he made was being watched and recorded. This moment wasn't just about him anymore. It had become something bigger, a lens through which people would view police interactions with the black community. Lieutenant Davis turned to Snoop. "Mr. Broaddus, I apologize for this incident." "You're free to go," but Snoop didn't move. Instead, he made the decision that would shock everyone present. "Actually, sir, if it's all right with you, I'd like to file a formal complaint and request that all body camera footage be preserved," he said calmly. "But I'd also like to propose something else." The lieutenant raised an eyebrow. "What did you have in mind?" Snoop looked at Reynolds, whose face had turned a shade paler. "I'd like to sit down with Officer Reynolds, yourself, and community representatives tomorrow morning. Not to get anyone fired or punished, but to have an honest conversation about what happened here tonight and how we can do better." A hush fell over the crowd. This wasn't the reaction they expected. No shouting, no demands for immediate justice, no outrage. Though Snoop had every right to be outraged. Lieutenant Davis looked surprised. "That's an unusual request." "These are unusual times," Snoop replied. "And nothing changes if we keep doing things the same way." Reynolds stared at Snoop, confusion written across his face. "You want to talk? After I just held you at gunpoint?" Snoop met his gaze steadily. "Yes, because what happened tonight is bigger than just you and me. This happens to people who look like me every day. Only they don't have cameras following them or people recognizing their name. If we can use this moment to create some understanding, maybe we save a life down the road." The crowd had gone quiet, hanging on every word. Someone whispered, "That's why he's the dog father," and a murmur of agreement rippled through the onlookers. Lieutenant Davis studied Snoop for a moment, then nodded. "I think that can be arranged." "My card." He handed Snoop his business card. "Call my office first thing tomorrow." As the situation de-escalated, people started to disperse, though many lingered, hoping to catch a word with Snoop. The rapper turned to address the crowd. "I appreciate y'all looking out for me tonight," he said, "but please go home safely. This isn't about creating more division. It's about finding solutions." A young man called out, "Why aren't you mad?" "He could have shot you." Snoop's expression turned serious. "Who says I'm not mad?" "I'm furious. But anger without purpose doesn't create change. And I've been working too long and too hard in this community to throw away an opportunity for real dialogue." As the crowd slowly dispersed, Snoop turned back to the officers. Reynolds was being taken aside by Wilson, their conversation heated but hushed. Lieutenant Davis approached Snoop again. That was an impressive display of restraint, Mr. Broadus. Not many would react that way in your position. Snoop shook his head. It shouldn't take impressive restraint to survive a traffic stop. That's the whole problem. Davis couldn't argue with that. We'll see you tomorrow then. 10 o'clock at the station? I'll be there, Snoop confirmed. And I'll be bringing some people with me. Community leaders, youth advocates. People who can help us have a real conversation. As Snoop finally got back into his SUV, he felt the weight of the night settling on his shoulders. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the steering wheel, the delayed reaction to having a gun pointed at his head. He took a moment to breathe, to process what had happened and what could have happened. His phone was buzzing nonstop. Videos of the incident had already hit social media and were spreading like wildfire. Calls were coming in from friends, family, his management team, reporters, but Snoop didn't answer any of them yet. He needed a moment of silence, a moment to himself. He drove home carefully, hyper-aware of every traffic law. When he finally pulled into his driveway, he sat in his car for a few minutes longer, gathering his thoughts. Inside, his wife was waiting, concern etched on her face. She'd already seen the videos. Are you okay? She asked, embracing him tightly. I'm alive, Snoop replied simply. And tomorrow maybe we can make sure someone else stays alive too. That night, as videos of the incident continued to spread online, the narrative was already forming. Snoop Dogg had turned what could have been another tragic headline into an opportunity for change. Hashtags were trending, calls for justice were mounting, but alongside them was something else, calls for dialogue, for understanding, for a new approach to an old problem. Snoop lay awake for hours, planning what he would say tomorrow, who he would bring with him, how he would handle this moment that had been thrust upon him. He hadn't asked for this responsibility, but now that it was his, he intended to use it wisely. As dawn broke, Snoop's phone rang. It was his longtime friend and fellow artist, a man who had seen his share of police encounters. You sure about this, Snoop? His friend asked. Nobody would blame you for just filing charges and letting the lawyers handle it. Snoop watched the sunrise through his window, golden light spreading across the Los Angeles skyline. I'm sure. Someone's got to try something different. Might as well be me. Then I'm with you, his friend replied. Just tell me when and where. By morning, what had started as a routine traffic stop gone wrong had become a national conversation. News outlets were covering the story. Social media was ablaze with opinions, and the police department was facing intense scrutiny. But unlike so many similar incidents, this one had the potential for a different ending. Snoop showered and dressed carefully, choosing a look that was respectful, but also authentically him. Today wasn't about changing who he was to make others comfortable. It was about bringing his full self to a conversation that was long overdue. As he prepared to leave for the police station, he received one more call from his mother. Calvin, she said, using his birth name as she always did in serious moments. I'm proud of you. But be careful. Not everyone wants change. I know, Mama, he replied. But someone's got to take the first step. With those words in mind, Snoop headed out to what would become one of the most important meetings of his life. Not as a rapper, not as a celebrity, but as a black man trying to bridge a divide that had claimed too many lives for far too long. The police station buzzed with unusual energy that morning. Word had spread quickly about who was coming and why. Officers glanced at the entrance every few minutes, some curious, others anxious. The press had gathered outside, kept at bay by barricades and uniformed officers. At exactly 5 minutes to 10, a small convoy of 3 cars pulled into the reserved parking area. Snoop stepped out of the lead vehicle, dressed in a tailored navy suit that managed to look both professional and true to his personal style. With him were 5 others, his lawyer, 2 community organizers, a youth counselor from his foundation, and a retired judge who had been advocating for police reform for decades. Lieutenant Davis met them at a private entrance, away from the media's prying eyes. Thank you for coming. Mr. Broadus, he said, extending his hand. Snoop shook it firmly. Appreciate you making this happen. These are my people. He introduced each member of his group. The lieutenant led them through the station to a conference room. The walls were bare except for a framed photo of the police chief and the department's mission statement. A large table dominated the center of the room, with pitchers of water and cups arranged neatly. Already seated were Sergeant Wilson, the police chief, and in the corner, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world, Officer Reynolds. He wore his full uniform but seemed smaller somehow, less imposing than he had appeared the previous night with his gun drawn. "Before we start," Snoop said as everyone took their seats, "I want to be clear about something. This isn't about embarrassing anyone or scoring points. It's about having an honest conversation that might prevent something worse from happening down the road." The police chief nodded. "We appreciate that approach, Mr. Broaddus. The department is committed to hearing your concerns and addressing them appropriately." It sounded like a prepared statement, the kind designed to sound good without promising anything specific. Snoop had heard similar words before, but he remained hopeful that today might be different. "Let's start by reviewing what happened," suggested the retired judge in Snoop's group. "I understand there's body camera footage?" Lieutenant Davis nodded and turned to a laptop connected to a wall-mounted screen. "We have footage from both Officer Reynolds and Sergeant Wilson." The room fell silent as the video began to play. Seeing the incident from the officer's perspective was surreal for Snoop. The footage showed exactly what he remembered: being pulled over, Reynolds approaching with his hand already on his weapon, the quick escalation when Snoop reached for the glove compartment. What the video captured that Snoop couldn't have seen was Reynolds' face, the tight jaw, the narrowed eyes, the subtle signs of preconceived judgment before a single word had been exchanged. When the footage ended, the room remained quiet for several moments. "Officer Reynolds," Snoop said finally, breaking the silence. "Can I ask you something directly?" Reynolds looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "Yes. What did you see when you looked at my car last night? Before you turned on your lights, before you knew who I was. What did you see?" Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. "A black SUV with tinted windows in an area known for drug activity." "And when you saw my face?" "What then?" "I saw—" Reynolds paused, struggling. "I saw someone who matched a certain profile." "A profile," Snoop repeated. "Not a person. Not a citizen. Not someone heading home after work. A profile." Reynolds had no response to that. The community organizer beside Snoop leaned forward. "Officer, your hand was on your weapon before you even reached the vehicle. Standard procedure teaches officers to approach with caution, but not to escalate without cause. Why did you feel the need to have your hand on your gun from the beginning?" Reynolds looked to his superiors, perhaps hoping for intervention, but the chief simply nodded for him to answer. "I've responded to calls in that area before. It can be dangerous at that area," Snoop repeated. "You mean the well-lit street by a convenience store in a middle-class neighborhood?" Reynolds flushed. "Look, I made a split-second decision based on my training and experience." "That's exactly what we're here to talk about," the youth counselor from Snoop's foundation chimed in. "If your training and experience led you to immediately view a black man in a nice car as a threat, then maybe we need to look at that training." For the next hour, the conversation continued, sometimes heated, sometimes painfully honest. They reviewed department policies, discussed implicit bias, and shared personal experiences. The retired judge talked about cases she had presided over where minor traffic stops had escalated to tragedy. The youth counselors shared stories of kids in their program who feared the police rather than seeing them as protectors. Throughout it all, Snoop remained composed, listening more than speaking, but when he did speak, everyone in the room paid attention. "Here's what I don't understand," he said during a particularly tense moment. "Last night could have gone so differently. If I had made one wrong move, if I had let my fear or anger take over for just a second, I might not be sitting here today. And for what? Allegedly dark window tint? How do we make sense of that?" The room fell silent again. It was the question at the heart of so many similar incidents, and there was no easy answer. Finally, Reynolds spoke up. "I was wrong," he said quietly. The admission seemed to physically pain him. But once the words were out, something in his posture changed. "I saw what I expected to see. I acted on assumptions I didn't even realize I was making. It wasn't a full awakening. Not by any means, but it was something. A crack in the armor. A moment of recognition." "Thank you for saying that," Snoop acknowledged. "That's a start." The police chief cleared his throat. "Mr. Broaddus, what would you like to see happen from here?" "Officer Reynolds will face an internal review, of course, but beyond that?" Snoop considered the question carefully. This was the moment that mattered, the opportunity to turn words into action. "I want 3 things," he said. "First, I want this footage, along with our discussion today, to be used in police training. not just in this department, but wherever it might help. Second, I want to establish a regular dialogue between officers and community members, especially young people. No cameras, no press, just honest conversations where both sides can speak freely. The chief nodded. And the third thing? I want Officer Reynolds to spend a month working with my foundation. Not as punishment, but as education. Let him meet the kids, hear their stories, understand their fears. Let him see them as people first, not profiles or statistics. Reynolds looked up, clearly surprised by the suggestion. You want me to work with you? After what happened? Especially after what happened, Snoop replied. Change doesn't come from pushing people away. It comes from pulling them in closer. The proposal was unconventional, to say the least. The police officials exchanged glances, silently conferring. Finally, the chief nodded. If Officer Reynolds is willing, we can make those arrangements. All eyes turned to Reynolds. He looked conflicted, trapped between defensiveness and an unexpected opportunity. I'll do it, he said after a long pause. If that's what you want. It's not about what I want, Snoop corrected him. It's about what we all need. As the meeting wrapped up, there was a sense that something significant had transpired. Not a complete solution, not a Hollywood ending, but a step in a new direction. They agreed to reconvene in 1 week to finalize the details of their agreement and discuss next steps. Outside, the press was still waiting. Questions were shouted as soon as Snoop emerged, but he raised a hand for quiet. Last night, I experienced something that too many people face without cameras or famous names to protect them, he told the gathered reporters. Today we started a conversation about how to change that. It's just a beginning, but it's a real one. A reporter called out, Are you pressing charges against Officer Reynolds? Snoop shook his head. This isn't about punishment. It's about progress. We're trying something different here. As he walked back to his car, his phone buzzed with notifications. The story had gone national, with commentators already taking sides, either praising his approach or criticizing him for not demanding harsher consequences. Social media was equally divided, with hashtags supporting both viewpoints trending simultaneously. Snoop ignored it all for now. Real change didn't happen in hashtags or headlines. It happened in rooms like the one he'd just left, in difficult conversations and uncomfortable truths. As he drove away from the station, he called his wife to update her. How did it go? She asked. Snoop considered the question. It went, honestly, and that's a start. That evening, as videos of his statement to the press circulated online, people across the country debated his approach. Some called him a sellout for not demanding Reynolds' badge. Others praised his restraint and wisdom. Everyone had an opinion, but in a small apartment across town, Officer Reynolds sat alone, rewatching his own body camera footage, seeing his actions through new eyes. The conversation wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. A week had passed since the meeting at the police station. The story had cycled through the news, replaced by newer headlines, though it still simmered on social media and in community discussions. For Snoop, however, this wasn't about headlines or viral moments. This was about the real work that happens after the cameras move on. The youth center occupied a renovated warehouse in a part of Los Angeles that had seen better days. Bright murals covered the exterior walls, artwork created by the very kids who came here after school to make music, learn about audio engineering, or simply find a safe space away from the streets. This was one of several centers funded by Snoop's foundation, places where passion could be channeled into creativity rather than conflict. Snoop arrived early that afternoon, parking his car in the small lot behind the building. Inside, staff members were setting up for the day's activities. Recording booths hummed with sound checks, and the common area buzzed with the energy of teenagers just arriving after school. Big day, said the center's director, greeting Snoop with a fist bump. The kids are buzzing about it. Half of them don't believe he's really coming. Snoop nodded. He'll be here. We talked yesterday to confirm. Despite his confidence, Snoop felt a flicker of uncertainty. Would Reynolds actually show up? The officer had agreed to the arrangement during their meeting, but people said a lot of things in rooms full of superiors and lawyers. Following through when the pressure was off was another matter entirely. At precisely 4 o'clock, a nondescript sedan pulled into the parking lot. Reynolds stepped out, dressed in civilian clothes, jeans and a button-up shirt. He looked smaller somehow without his uniform and gear, more human. He paused for a moment, taking in the colorful building, perhaps reconsidering his decision to come. Snoop met him at the back entrance, away from curious eyes. "You showed up," Snoop said simply. Reynolds nodded. "I gave my word. Appreciate that." Snoop extended his hand, and after a brief hesitation, Reynolds shook it. "Before we go in, I want to be clear about something. These kids don't know what happened between us. They don't need to know. Today isn't about that." "Then what is it about?" Reynolds asked. "It's about seeing people as people," Snoop replied. "Nothing more, nothing less." Inside, the center director had gathered about 20 teenagers in the main area. They sat on couches and beanbag chairs, their attention immediately shifting when Snoop walked in. Their excitement at seeing the legendary rapper was obvious, but curiosity bloomed on their faces when they noticed the unfamiliar man beside him. "What's good, family?" Snoop greeted them with genuine warmth. "Thanks for coming through today. Got someone I want y'all to meet. This is Tom. He's going to be hanging with us for a while, learning about what we do here." Reynolds raised a hand awkwardly. "Hello." A boy in the front, no more than 15, squinted at him. "You a cop, ain't you?" The room tensed. Reynolds looked to Snoop, unsure how to respond. "Yeah, he is," Snoop confirmed calmly. "And today he's here to listen. Same as I'm here to listen to y'all. That's how we learn from each other." The tension didn't fully dissipate, but Snoop's easy manner helped. He guided the conversation skillfully, inviting kids to talk about their music, their dreams, and eventually their experiences. Without prompting, the conversation naturally turned to interactions with police. A 17-year-old boy spoke up. "I got stopped 3 times last month just walking home from school. Same cops, same questions every time." Another teen nodded. "My little brother's scared to play in the front yard now. Cops rolled up on him and his friends last summer. Had them all face down on the grass. They were playing basketball." Story after story emerged, each one candid and unfiltered. Through it all, Reynolds sat silently, his expression unreadable, though his complexion grew paler with each account. Snoop kept the conversation balanced, neither vilifying police entirely, nor dismissing the teens' experiences. "The goal isn't to hate each other," he reminded them. "The goal is to understand each other better." After the group discussion, they broke into smaller activities. Some kids went to the recording studio, others to the production suite. Snoop made sure Reynolds rotated through each group, experiencing the full scope of what the center offered. In the beat-making class, a 16-year-old girl with remarkable talent was showing others how to layer tracks. When Reynolds expressed genuine interest, she hesitantly offered him the headphones. "That's incredible," he said after listening. "How long have you been doing this?" "Since I was 9, she replied, a hint of pride breaking through her caution. "My dad taught me before he passed. He'd be proud," Reynolds said sincerely. It was a small moment, but something shifted between them, a tiny bridge across a vast divide. As the afternoon progressed, Reynolds gradually relaxed. The uniform and badge that usually defined him were absent, forcing him to connect as just another person. By the time the day's activities were wrapping up, he was sitting with a group of boys, listening to their tracks and asking questions that showed real engagement. Snoop observed from a distance, letting the process unfold naturally. This was the point, not a forced apology or scripted sensitivity training, but genuine human connection. When most of the kids had gone home, Reynolds found Snoop in the small office at the back of the center. "These kids are incredible," he said, his voice reflecting genuine surprise. "The talent in this room, they're just kids," Snoop replied. "No different from any others, except maybe they've seen more than they should have at their age." Reynolds was quiet for a moment. "Some of their stories about the police, is it really that bad?" "Worse for some," Snoop said honestly. "What you saw today was just the tip. Most of these kids still have some trust left. Others—" He let the sentence hang. "I've never thought of it that way," Reynolds admitted. "When you put on the uniform, you see threats, not people. It's drilled into you. Officer safety above all else." "I get that," Snoop acknowledged. "But when one side only sees threats and the other side only sees oppressors, we end up where we are now." Reynolds nodded slowly. "So what happens next?" "You come back tomorrow," Snoop said simply. "And the day after that. You listen more than you talk. You learn their names, their stories. You see them as kids first, not potential problems. And that changes things?" Reynolds sounded skeptical but not dismissive. "It's a start," Snoop replied. "Change has to begin somewhere." As they walked to their cars, Reynolds paused. My partner thinks I'm crazy for doing this. Says I'm being used for a publicity stunt. And what do you think? Snoop asked. Reynolds considered the question. I think I saw something different today than what I expected to see. And maybe that's the whole point. The next day, Reynolds returned as promised. And the day after that, some of the kids remained wary, but others began to open up. He learned their names, their stories, their dreams and fears. He helped carry equipment, listened to their music, even attempted some truly terrible freestyle rapping that had them doubled over with laughter. By the end of the second week, something remarkable had happened. The officer who had held a gun to Snoop's head was now sitting cross-legged on the floor with a group of teenagers, engaged in a heated but respectful debate about police and schools. Word of the unusual arrangement had spread. Other officers from Reynolds's precinct drove by the center, curious about what their colleague was doing. A few even stopped in, awkward and uncertain at first, but gradually engaging with the kids and staff. Local news picked up the story again. Rapper and police officer team up for community healing, read one headline. Snoop turned down most interview requests, insisting this wasn't about publicity. The real work happens away from the cameras, he told the center director. 1 month stretched into 2. Reynolds continued showing up, no longer because of an agreement, but because he wanted to. The change in him was subtle but undeniable. The way he carried himself, the way he listened, the questions he asked. On a warm Friday afternoon, as Reynolds helped a young DJ set up for a community performance, Snoop pulled him aside. Your official time here is up, he said. Agreements fulfilled. Reynolds looked around at the center, at the kids who now greeted him by name. What if I want to keep coming back? On my own time, Snoop smiled. Doors are always open, man. That evening, as the community gathered for the performance, something unexpected happened. Reynolds arrived in uniform, not to police the event, but because he had come directly from his shift. As he walked through the crowd, there was a moment of tension, the sight of the uniform triggering old fears and resentments. But then one of the kids called out to him by name, waved him over. Others followed suit. The uniform was still the uniform, but the man inside it was now someone they knew, someone they had laughed with and argued with and ultimately connected with as a human being. It wasn't a perfect solution. It didn't erase decades of mistrust or systemic problems, but it was a step, a real one, toward something better. And sometimes that's how change begins, not with grand gestures or sweeping reforms, but with small moments of genuine human connection. As Snoop watched Reynolds talking with a group of teens, their body language relaxed and engaged despite his uniform. He knew they had created something meaningful, a template for a different kind of conversation. A different approach to an old and painful problem. One person at a time, he murmured to himself. That's how we do it. One person at a time. 6 months had passed since that night when Snoop found himself staring down the barrel of Officer Reynolds' gun. 6 months of quiet work, small victories and occasional setbacks. The headlines had long since moved on to fresher controversies. But the ripples from that encounter continued to spread in ways no one could have predicted. On a bright Saturday morning, Snoop stood on a makeshift stage in the community park, looking out at a crowd that would have seemed impossible half a year ago. Families sat on blankets and folding chairs. Children played nearby, and most remarkably, uniformed police officers mingled comfortably with community members. This was the third Breaking Bread event they'd organized, a combination of community cookout, talent showcase, and open dialogue. What had started as a small gathering had grown into something approaching a movement, with similar events popping up in other neighborhoods and even other cities. I want to thank everyone for coming out today, Snoop said into the microphone, his voice carrying across the park. When we started this, people said it wouldn't last, said we were just putting on a show. Well, 6 months later, look around you. The crowd applauded, many nodding in agreement. Among them was Reynolds, not standing apart with other officers but sitting with some of the teens from the youth center, a plate of barbecue balanced on his knee. This isn't about pretending everything's perfect, Snoop continued. We still got work to do, but it's about saying we're willing to do that work together face to face as human beings. After Snoop's brief introduction, the event shifted into its usual format. Food was served from long tables staffed by volunteers from both the community and the police department. On a smaller stage, young performers from the youth center showcased their talents. And throughout the park, conversation stations were set up, places where people could sit together and talk about specific issues, guided by trained facilitators. Snoop moved through the crowd, greeting people, listening to concerns, celebrating successes. He paused near one of the conversation circles where the topic was first encounters, how initial interactions between police and young people shaped perceptions on both sides. Reynolds was part of this group, sharing his perspective alongside parents, teenagers, and other officers. What struck Snoop most was how different Reynolds looked now, not physically but in his demeanor. The rigid defensiveness was gone, replaced by an openness to hearing others and a willingness to acknowledge his own learning process. I was trained to see certain neighborhoods, certain people, as inherent threats, Reynolds was saying to the group. It wasn't stated outright, but it was in everything. Where we patrolled, who we stopped, how we approached different situations. I didn't question it because that's just how things were done. A woman in the circle shook her head. That's what we've been trying to tell you all for years. Our kids get treated like criminals before they ever do anything wrong. You're right, Reynolds acknowledged, something that would have seemed impossible 6 months ago. And I can't speak for every officer, but I can tell you that spending time at the youth center changed how I see things. These kids I was taught to view as potential threats. They're just kids with dreams, talents, struggles. No different than anyone else's kids. The conversation continued, sometimes tense but always respectful. This was the real work. Not the flashy headlines or public statements, but people sitting face to face, speaking their truths and listening to others. Later, as volunteers began cleaning up and families started heading home, Snoop found Reynolds helping to fold chairs. Good session? Snoop asked. Reynolds nodded. Getting easier, talking about these things. Still not easy, but easier. That's progress, Snoop replied. Speaking of which, heard you got a new assignment. Reynolds set down the folded chair. News travels fast. Yeah, starting next week. Community liaison officer. I'll be working with schools, neighborhood groups, businesses. Building relationships before problems happen, not just showing up when they do. Snoop smiled. Look at you, man. Making moves. It's because of this program, Reynolds said. The chief's been watching what we're doing here. Says he wants more officers with this kind of experience. That right there? That's how change happens, Snoop said. One person, one policy at a time. As they continued packing up, the youth center director approached with news. That reporter's here again, she said. The one from the national magazine. Says it's for the big feature they're doing. Snoop sighed. He'd been declining most media requests, wary of turning their work into a spectacle. But this particular journalist had been persistent, spending weeks with them, observing without interfering, earning their trust. All right. Where is she? The reporter was waiting by a picnic table, notebook in hand. She'd been documenting their story for months, looking at the broader implications of what had started as a traffic stop gone wrong. Mr. Broadus, Officer Reynolds, she greeted them. Thank you for making time. I just have a few final questions for the piece. They sat together, an unlikely trio. The rapper, the police officer, and the journalist chronicling their story. The article goes to print next week, she explained. It's titled The Unexpected Aftermath. We've covered the program, the community impact, the changes in department policy. But what I'm still trying to understand is the personal side. 6 months ago, you two were on opposite sides of a gun. Now you're building something together. How does that happen? Snoop and Reynolds exchanged glances. Necessity, Snoop answered first. We've been having the same conversations, the same conflicts for decades. Nothing changes. At some point, you either give up or try something different. For me, Reynolds added, it was about getting past my own defensiveness. Every time someone criticized the police, I took it personally, like they were attacking me. It took time to realize that acknowledging problems isn't the same as saying all cops are bad. The reporter nodded, writing quickly. The department has adopted some of your recommendations for training and community engagement. Do you think this model can work elsewhere? It's not a magic solution, Snoop cautioned. What works here might not work everywhere, but the principle is universal. Seeing each other as people first, listening without assuming, being willing to be uncomfortable for the sake of progress. And the key is sustainability, Reynolds added. This can't be a one-time reaction to a crisis. It has to become part of how we operate every day. As the interview concluded, the reporter had one final question. "What's next for this initiative?" Snoop smiled. "We're taking it on the road. Starting next month, we're visiting 5 cities, bringing this model to other communities, training local leaders to adapt it to their needs. The department's fully supportive," Reynolds confirmed. "I'll be part of the training team, along with several other officers. It's been officially incorporated into our community policing strategy." Later, as the park emptied and the sun began to set, Snoop took a moment alone, looking out over the grounds where something remarkable had taken place. His phone buzzed with messages from fellow artists and activists, all wanting to know more about the program, how they could support it or bring it to their communities. This wasn't how he had imagined his legacy. Music had always been his primary voice, his way of telling stories and speaking truth. But life had its own plans sometimes, its own way of putting you exactly where you needed to be. A car pulled up nearby, and Reynolds stepped out, now changed into civilian clothes. He walked over to where Snoop stood. "Heading out?" Snoop asked. Reynolds nodded. "Got dinner with some of the kids from the center. They're helping me practice my terrible basketball skills afterward." Snoop laughed. "Good luck with that." "Those kids don't take it easy on anybody." "I've noticed," Reynolds said with a smile. Then more seriously, "You know, I never properly thanked you." "For what?" "For not hating me," Reynolds said simply. "You had every right to. What I did that night, I look back now and barely recognize myself. You could have demanded my badge, could have made sure I never worked in law enforcement again. Instead, you offered a different path." Snoop was quiet for a moment. "Hate's easy. Building something new is harder, but in the end it lasts longer." They stood side by side, looking out over the empty park as the day's last light faded. "See you Tuesday at the center?" Reynolds asked. "I'll be there," Snoop confirmed. As Reynolds walked back to his car, Snoop reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. The night he stared down the barrel of a gun could have ended so differently, with anger, with tragedy, with nothing changed and nothing learned. Instead, it had become the catalyst for something neither man could have imagined. The program they'd built together wasn't perfect. The problems it addressed weren't solved. The work was ongoing, sometimes frustrating, often 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But it was real work with real results. Lives were changing. Perceptions were shifting. Barriers were coming down, slowly but surely. And maybe that was the most powerful message of all. That transformation was possible, even from the most unlikely beginnings. That people could change if given the chance. That hatred wasn't inevitable, and healing wasn't impossible. As Snoop finally headed to his own car, he thought about all the young people watching this story unfold. Not just the kids at his center, but young people everywhere, looking for proof that a better way was possible. If nothing else, he and Reynolds had given them that proof. A living example of choosing connection over conflict, understanding over anger, progress over punishment. Some would call it naive. Others would say it wasn't enough. But for the communities touched by their work, for the officers learning new approaches, for the young people finding their voices, it was something vital and real, a step toward the world they all deserved to live in. And that, Snoop thought as he drove away, was worth more than any chart-topping record or sold-out show. It was a different kind of legacy, unexpected but profound. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful lyrics aren't sung but lived one day, one conversation, one connection at a time.